You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Christina Patterson and the former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Telegraph reports on Rishi Sunak's vow to bring back national service for 18-year-olds in his first major campaign policy. The Sunday Times adds that the plan would legally require all of them to sign up for a year. The Mail on Sunday leads with the same story, calling it a radical plan. And the Express also highlights this story on its front page. The Observer reports on the Shadow Chancellor's claim that the Tories have £64 billion in unfunded election promises. The Sunday Mirror reports on TV broadcasters Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford divorcing after 14 years of marriage. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by journalist and author Christina Patterson and the former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Telegraph and this first new policy announcement from the Conservatives. The Prime Minister saying, I will bring back national service for 18-year-olds, Christina.
Well, all I can say is thank goodness we've only got a few more weeks of this, because clearly they're going to be... The Tories are desperate, and I imagine Rishi Sunak's got a nice job lined up in Silicon Valley, so he's just trying to get it over with. But in the meantime, we're going to go through a carnival parade of crazy policies, one day after the other. Perhaps tomorrow it'll be bring back hanging, who knows. But today it's about, let's bring back conscription.
I take it you don't think it's a vote winner?
I don't think it is a vote winner, but I also think it's irrelevant. I certainly don't think many 18-year-olds will be voting for it, but then I don't think many 18-year-olds will be voting for the Conservatives anyway, or perhaps not even voting at all, because they're not great at turning out for elections. But the idea, I don't think it's a terrible idea. I think a number of European countries, like Sweden, do have conscription, and I think that getting youngsters, particularly the community service aspect of it, and part of this idea is that people either do military service or they do some kind of weekend community work. I think that's a good idea. I think a lot of youngsters do feel pretty cut off from society, and they've been brought up in the age of social media and smartphones, and many have not had the opportunity, and of course they've had COVID and lockdowns, so many of them haven't had the opportunity for social interaction that they would have had for previous generations. But I think greater investment in society is a good thing, but I think this is fantasy because it's not going to happen.
The Prime Minister saying that he wants to bring about a renewed sense of pride in our country, a shared sense of purpose, and it will bring that to youngsters in the face of forces which are trying to divide our society.
Yeah, I just think this is a great idea. And I actually think, Christina, you seem to have persuaded yourself during that course of that conversation.
I thought before. I'm half Swedish, and in Sweden they have it.
Yes,
I'm not anti it. I just think that they're not going to win the election.
Yes, but let's engage with the policy as it exists in front of us, right? It feels like there is a genuine need to engage more young people, a genuine need to get them invested in their community. There is some real upskilling in some of these ideas. So you can work in cyber defence, you can work in cyber security. These are things that would be crucial skills that will improve employability. And we know that with young people, there has been some concerns about the way that, different genders are kind of relating to politics and society, their ideas about inclusion. I feel like there's something here that really would do a lot for our society as a whole if we could bring this back. And I actually think that Europe and Sweden in particular have shown that it can really be successful for setting young people up for a really successful future career. So I truly think I saw this and thought, right, this is something that would actually help in driving cohesion and helping to upskill and engage our youth. So
what about those who want to go on to further education, A-levels, and then potentially degrees. I mean, how would they be able to do that? Or would they have to suspend a year in order to do the national service?
Well, so I think you can choose basically between doing this year placement or doing this weekend's volunteering. But it also says there's going to be a Royal Commission that kind of specifically designs the programme. So I'm sure there's going to be flexibility. It's managed in other European countries quite easily.
Yes, he's pledging that a future Conservative government would set up a Royal Commission to design the National Service programme, with a pilot scheme opening for applications in September 25, ahead of a countrywide rollout by 2029. You're looking sceptical again.
Well, I just think, did they dream this up at 4 o'clock yesterday? I mean, I just think this is how it's going to be now, because obviously most people in the Tory party had no idea that the election was going to be called. Many of them are absolutely hopping mad about it. And I think it is going to be a case of let's see what we can rustle up. And it's kind of back of the envelope stuff. So I'm not, and never was, totally anti the policy. I just think we've got 6 weeks of pure fantasy ahead of us.
But seemingly young people are at the heart of the campaigning thus far, certainly today, with Labour wanting to extend voting age to 16 and 17-year-olds, Anita.
Yes, and I mean, this is a kind of age-old debate. I personally think you have to pick an age, and 18 makes more sense when you think about all the ways in which you become an adult. And I sort of think that actually it's a bit of a shortcut, because what you actually want is to engage people in politics. And the idea that what you can do is go, well, we can give you the ability to vote, and that will be sufficient for re-engaging young people. I just think it's for the birds and is a massive distraction. I actually think that ideas like this that bring people in and allow them to do something and learn something and invest in their community is much better for getting them involved in their society than just saying, well, you can have the vote, like, even if they don't know anything about voting or don't know how to go about it.
Christina, what are your thoughts on that? Because Sir Keir Starmer is saying if they can work and pay taxes, then they should have the right to
I agree with
comment.
him. I agree with him, actually. And I don't think it's a case of either or. I think it can be both. And I think that if 16-year-olds could vote, maybe there would be more reason for teachers, for example, for schools to do more to educate youngsters about the importance of democracy, about, what to look out for in social media, how to look out for bots, how you get your education in politics not only from TikTok. I think it could be a major opportunity, because at 18 is leaving age, whereas people will actually be at school if they vote at 16. So I think it's not a bad idea. And obviously it would help the Labour Party in the long term, but I also think that's a good idea, so that's fine.
Meanwhile, the economy, also on the front pages, Anita, Rachel Reeves accusing the Tories of desperation. The Shadow Chancellor saying that they're making £64 billion of unfunded spending commitments.
Yes, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I'm sort of like, we've got 6 weeks of this, right, where it's just sort of, well, we think you're saying that you're going to get rid of income tax, which absolutely nobody believes, and therefore it's going to cost 64 billion. It feels like Labour had an opportunity to set out what they actually want to do, and it feels like a wasted opportunity to instead say, well, look at the Tories, when they should really be setting out their stall for managing the economy, given how many tough choices are going to have to be made, and given the need for the public to really understand what could happen if Labour win the election. And this is just kind of old school kind of, it's going to be this amount bombshell kind of story that I don't think really does what the public is expecting and needs from both parties.
But Jeremy Hunt has made clear an intention, though, to get rid of inheritance tax, hasn't he?
Yeah, so an inheritance tax, but he said something like we might need to reform the way we think about income tax and national insurance, and that does not equate to an abolition of one or two or both of those. So I think we all know this is not what the Conservative Party is pledging, and it just feels like same old electioneering politics here.
Christina?
Well, I think that tax is actually a fruitful point of discussion for the Labour Party, because we have the highest taxes since the Second World War, introduced by 14 years of Tory government. And I think that's worth pointing out to people. We have higher taxes than ever and worse public services than we've had for many, many years. And yes, absolutely, Labour will be very constrained in terms of improving public services, because they've agreed to stick to the fiscal rules that the Tories have introduced, and of which they've made a total mess, basically. But yes, it's boring, this stuff, but I think it is absolutely irresponsible for Jeremy. I think it was irresponsible for Jeremy Hunt to to talk about the national insurance cut. I think actually the polls indicate, both for the election, in terms of who they want in government, but generally that people are more concerned now about the quality of public services than they are about getting tax cuts.
Yes, but what you're saying is boring. The problem is not boring. The problem is it's not true. Like, does anyone actually believe that the Conservative Party is going to abolish national insurance, income tax and inheritance tax?
Well,
So you could say the thing that you said, which is actually there are some really difficult choices. The tax burden's too high. Here's how we're going to bring the tax burden down. Or you can do this stuff.
I don't think they're talking about abolishing. It's about cutting taxes, so including national insurance, income tax and inheritance
Well, it
tax.
says, Rachel Reeves said, what appeared to be pledges to slash taxes would cost £64 billion. What does that mean?
Well, they've talked about making those. They've bandied all kinds of ideas around. I think she's perfectly entitled to. Look, a lot of this will be about essentially pointing out what others have said. And, you know, Rishi Sunak has already launched a scaremongering campaign about how things are going to be absolutely terrible if Labour get into power. So I think it's fine for Rachel Reeves to say, look, they've mooted this tax cut, this tax cut, this
So you
tax
think
cut.
the Conservatives are going to deliver £64 billion of tax cuts? Well, then, OK, so then we're agreed. It's not what's going to happen, so what is this?
I think she's responding. I don't think she's a wildly incautious person.
You don't think she's scaremongering?
I think, yes, of course she's scaremongering, but I think she's entitled to scaremonger because of what they've said about tax cuts, which of course they won't get the chance to do now. But I think one of the reasons they've decided to have the election now rather than in the autumn is because they know they can't afford any more tax cuts.
This worsens public debate.
We're going to leave it there. We're going to leave our debate there. Christina and Anita, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, more from the newspapers, including this in The Observer about the Church of England's historical links to slavery. Do stay with us.
I would say that training is actually going really, really well right now. I'm just in a place where physically I'm feeling great, but the most important thing is to get ready for trials, which is actually happening next month, and really just do my best to make sure that I'm making the team for Paris this year.
OK, and just remind us of which disciplines you do?
So I compete in the 100 and 200, and of course, based on selection, I could potentially also be selected for the 4x100 metre relay. I feel like for me, it's all about mental preparation, and I think Solgar research shows that 55% of Brits are not able to reach their full potential just as a result of feeling fatigued and tired. And I think for myself, I always like to have a goal in mind, but then kind of break it down as to how is this possible? I know that I'm able to have a team around me to kind of help me with that, but then also being, you know, kinder to myself in that preparation, setting realistic expectations, and also just kind of feeling confident about what I am about to achieve and giving it all I've got. I would say being kinder to myself looks like taking time out when I need it. I don't work hard to the point of getting burnt out. I can feel as though that if training is becoming too intense, I have a great and open communication with my coach to let him know that I need a rest. So therefore, I take it rather than continuing to push through, which I believe a lot of people do, which again leads to burnout. I would say is set realistic expectations and plans. I always start my day with one task at a time. For some, or for myself, it's just getting up. The next step is have breakfast, then have a shower, then get to training. And I think if Brits and other individuals are able to simplify their lives just like that, then essentially you're not going to become as overwhelmed as the bigger goals that you have, such as the workplace, whatever you're meant to achieve there, or as an athlete, what you actually have to achieve on the track. So again, by simplifying things one at a time, I feel like people are able to then achieve their great things. That was my first Olympics, going to, you know, Brazil. And I think for myself, the goal was just to make the team, you know, obviously do my best, but then to take myself from not just being an Olympian to now an Olympic medalist, you know, that's honestly one of the greatest things that I've been able to achieve. The Olympics is the pinnacle of our sports, such as athletics, and to consider myself or call myself an Olympic medalist now, it's kind of like a pinch me moment that I get to call myself that. So I honestly feel great about it. Taking care of my mental health, taking care of my physical health, and ensuring that come June I'm on the start line feeling as mentally confident and physically confident as ever.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, journalist and author Christina Patterson and the former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. Let's take a look, first of all, at the Telegraph in this section and the story about Labour's VAT on private school fees. The article here claiming that Sir Keir Starmer's planned tax raid on private education has claimed its first victim with the closure of a private school where parents faced paying that increased amount. But that strikes me as odd. It
hasn't happened. It says, in fact, the article says, the headline is, well, slightly misleading, but it says Labour's VAT raid blamed for closure of private school. It says parents were blaming the Labour threat, but there's no evidence to support that. It sounds as if the school was failing already, and they'd already brought in a new head to see if he could salvage things and raise student numbers, and he hasn't managed to. So it's a Catholic school. It sounds as though there wasn't great demand for it. So I think it's unlikely to be true that it was Keir Starmer's threat about VAT on schools. But I also think that the Tories are kind of, and indeed the Tory supporting press, like to suggest that this is a huge issue for the middle classes. 7% of people in this country go to private schools, and they are extremely expensive. So you have to be very wealthy. This is not something that normal middle class or people can do. A lot of the people who now go to private schools are from abroad. They are very high.
Is that true, though? Do you have to be incredibly wealthy, or do you just have to make it a priority? You know, there are people doing very ordinary jobs who perhaps supplement their income because it's their priority to send their child to a private school.
That certainly used to be the case, but I think given how much the average private school costs now, I think it's much less the case. And I think if you look at the numbers generally, they are much wealthier people than used to be the case. I did know of people whose parents did really struggle to send their children to private schools. But I think now, with costs of 30, 40 grand per child, if you've got a couple of children, that's, way more than, given their average earnings in this country are 36 grand, then that puts it, way below what most parents can afford, even if they do scrimp and save.
Anita, the school are saying, they've released a statement on their website, and they're saying that adverse political and economic factors had drained pupil numbers, leaving it unviable to run. Labour's plan has clearly had a terrible impact on the intake. It seems like the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to read anything other than, if they say a school to say adverse political and economic factors, I feel like they're alluding to that. And what's really striking about this really is that the parents are clearly kind of concerned about this increase in 20% of VAT. Now, I didn't go to a private school. But I think they play an important role. And it feels like there are certainly anxieties amongst not just these parents, but parents across the board about what this means and whether this will actually mean that private schools become even more just a purview of people who are abroad or who are extremely wealthy, rather than being something that some parents can look to do if they're really concerned about the quality of schools in their local area. Because we all know that schooling can be a bit of a postcode lottery. And even though actually education generally has gotten much better in the UK, or certainly in England, let's be clear, I still think that there are, having choice, I think, is quite an important component of this. So an interesting story.
Christina, just very quickly, do you think it will then push more students back into the state sector, and then we'll see larger classroom sizes and fewer resources? I
think the jury's out on that. Personally, I think it's quite unlikely, because I think that my sense is that because it is already pretty wealthy people who send their children to private school, I think it's unlikely that that on its own is going to push people out of private schools. But that might happen. I'm not in favour of private education, so for me, from my point of view, it wouldn't be a disaster if that happened. I think that getting students from all backgrounds in schools together, as happens very successfully in a lot of inner city schools in London, is one of the best ways to increase the standards of education.
OK. Anita, let's move on to the Observer front page and this story about the church revealing direct links to slavery.
Yes, an intriguing story saying that the observers unearthed documents that confirm that an Archbishop of Canterbury in the 18th century approved payments for the purchase of enslaved people in Barbados. And so, I mean, I don't know who this is surprising to, but it's surprising apparently. And so the response talks about the kind of direct link to slavery, which, I'm not entirely sure who was surprised by this, and also the Archbishop now of Canterbury, Justin Welby, talks about it being particularly painful. So I think interesting to have something that kind of officially confirms and talks about the amounts and all the rest of it, and their role in the kind of missionary arm that seemed to be involved in some form of chattel slavery.
Yes, but it is something that we have known about,
Yeah.
isn't it, Christine?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it was horrifically deemed culturally acceptable. And then until it suddenly wasn't. So it's not particularly surprising that the church, like every other institution, would have subscribed to what was widely regarded as fine. I mean, clearly it's terrible that it was regarded as fine, but it was. And that's how history works. People do all kinds of terrible things to other humans until they decide that those things are no longer acceptable. And thank God that particular one, although, of course, there is still plenty of slavery happening in the world. It's just not happening in that particular form in this country and in a lot of the West anymore.
Anita, what about the thought that the church should pay reparations?
Yeah, this is a complicated issue. I sort of think that so much of accountability around this ends up becoming about reparations and not about some of the structural challenges that people who were enslaved or certain ethnic minorities face as a result of the propaganda and campaigns that really sat alongside slavery. So it feels to me as though it slightly misses the point, which is around the kind of structural barriers that people from certain descendants have in dealing and navigating living in the West. So I think that it sort of feels like, in some ways, an abdication of some of that responsibility and engagement that we need to see that's a lot harder than saying we're providing money that's going to go to some kind of charity, I would presume, or to a particular country.
Christine, you've got about 20 seconds. For your
I
view.
mean, I have no idea how you would do the sums. I think, you would just pluck a figure from the air, and I agree with Anita. I think it's much more important to tackle structural racism.
OK, Christina and Anita, thank you so much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you in the 11 o'clock hour. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the Conservatives pledge to reintroduce compulsory national service as Labour promises to extend the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds.